All right, today we're doing head studs on a 12 valve. Now, heads just got back from the machine shop. I've got all the bolts other than the ones here for the rocker pedestals just cinched down with a 1/4 inch ratchet, nothing crazy. Now, this engine just did as well get a set of brand new Hamilton push rods. Now, when you get push rods from Hamilton, they are different. So the thicker ones are your exhaust push rods, the smaller ones are your intake. Now when you go to put them in, be careful, look down the bore with a flashlight and make sure that you've got the push rod fully seated in the tappet. Don't know if you guys can see down in there very well, but that is sitting right in the cup of the tappet. You want to look down every single one, make sure they're all seated correctly. If they're not, you're probably going to end up breaking valve train components. Now, these ARP studs are not just throw them in. These are for milled rockers. Grab a rocker assembly right here. You see that shelf that's been milled down on the back here. Now that has to be done on these for them to go on. Now this is not going on for good. I need to come back through and clean before I install this. But I'll just leave the push rod off to the side for right now. You can see that gives us full engagement by the time we get a washer and a nut. Now everything that's threads here needs to be coated with the ARP Ultra Torque that comes with it. They really don't recommend using engine oil or anything like that. And when these go in, you want to clean up all of these surfaces. Make sure that everything's good. You don't want any dirt or debris getting trapped in there, especially down on this surface right here, because around this is where oil is going to come up and feed into the rocker pedestals. So you want to make sure all that's cleaned out. You want to make sure you run all your pedestals through the parts washer, make sure they're clean. So you can see I got a little bit of assembly lube on the end of the push rods, a little bit on the end of the valves. Should be ready to go. I'm just going to do a little bit more cleaning here, get a fresh rag, make sure that all these surfaces here, I don't want any of that dirt there. I want that to be nice and clean. And then we'll get the rockers on. Now, when you're doing the rears, the way the cowl sits, there are actually holes up here in the cowl, some plugs you can pull out that allow the head studs and the push rods, you can see it up there, to come all the way up. So once it's up, you rotate it out, you can pull it out, push it back through the hole, and feed it back down in there, and make sure that you have it seated in the tappet. Right there. So I'm going to do a little bit of cleaning here, and then I'll jump to it when we go to get these rockers on. So this is one of the pedestals fresh back from the machine shop before we reassemble them. So you can see we stamp them before they go. All the parts are tagged to make sure they go back on the same pedestal. But they just cut this mill in the back so that we have clearance for those studs. Because if you look at it, once they're assembled, that sits flush right with the top of the stud. Now, the goal with having these milled ones is you have a lower install height, so you shouldn't have to modify the rocker box covers. But this is not ready to reassemble yet. This is from a machine shop. Anything you get back from the machine shop, whether they say they clean it or not, assume it's dirty. I don't want any little bit of dirt, debris, grit, nothing like that to be inside here, because the oil comes up through here and goes out through these two ports here to lubricate the rockers, the valves, and the push rods. We need to make sure that this thing is clean before it goes on the truck. So we're going to give it a nice bath in the parts washer, scrub it down. Most importantly, I want to sit here and hold that just like that. You guys can see, yeah, there we go. That it's just pushing that solvent and cleaner right up through there. I want to make sure that's good and flushed out. I don't want to get any grit trapped in there. I mean, no use doing all this work just to cause it to do something later where it's going to self-destruct. Back flush through these. Put the phone down here for a sec so I can finish getting this thing nice and clean, because I want this thing to be spotless before we reassemble it. Alright, now that it's nice, clean, dried off, we're going to go to assembling it. Throw some assembly lube on there. Make sure your gloves are clean, your hands are clean, your work area is clean. Just like anytime you're doing any type of engine assembly. Now that we have that, the washer on there. Take our snap ring. That side's done. Washer. And the snap ring's on. Just sit there and work them back and forth a little bit, make sure that assembly lube's in there pretty good. Now that we have that done, you can see we clearly have extra assembly lube. Just go ahead and wipe that off. I'd rather use too much than not enough. The upside to this stuff too is, I'll show you in a second, this stuff is actually, it kind of has a stick to it, and when you go to check to make sure your tappets are installed right, they're sitting down in a cup, you can actually lift the tappet a little bit, you'll feel some drag, and that helps you on those back cylinders where you can't see so well if you don't have a borescope to get down in there. But that is an assembled rocker assembly, and this is number 6, last one to go in. So we'll go hop up on the truck, I'll set you guys up, and I'll show you what we do for the install back there. Alright, so first things first, before we go throwing this all together, my adjusters are backed off. That way, if we are sitting on the cam back there, that we aren't going to hurt it. So, I'm going to put it in there. Make sure that the ball end, push rod, seated. Before install, went through, checked, made sure that we had full engagement into the tappets, that we're not sitting in there crooked, because if not, you can cause valve train and component damage. Ultra torque lube. Go ahead and get that started. This one here ran up quite a bit. There we go. I got a little bit of tension against it. I don't want it so loose that it just slides right off there. Down here, I've got my washer, my nut. Those are already coated on their faces with ultra torque lube. Take some on my finger, put it on the threads of that stud. Now when these studs go in, I just take a Allen socket, run them down by hand. They should all go in by hand. You don't have really a torque or a tightening sequence. They just need to be all the way down. But you need to make sure that they go all the way down. Now when the head was off, all the holes were chased, cleaned out. Okay, it's sitting down there pretty flat. Now, I'm not torquing anything yet. None of the head bolts have been done. All I've done is take this ratchet here, just get them all snugging down. So this is a snap-on. It's a 1/4 inch ratchet, but it's got 3/8 kit in it, and it's adapted up to 1/2 inch drive because I'm using 1/2 inch 12 points here. But I'm not doing anything crazy as far as tightening. Just making sure that everything's seated. The head was all ran down in the torque sequence the same way to make sure that it was just set, that nothing's going to walk around on me. Once this is done, we can actually start the torquing sequence on these. Alright, so if you look here, our head studs are torqued to 125 foot-pounds, and those little M8 bolts that go into the rocker pedestals torqued to 25. Now, everything is just snugged up with a 3/8 ratchet right now. We're going to call that our step 1 for torquing. There's not really anything on there. Everything's just seated down so it can't move around. We're ready to go. So what we're going to do now is look at these numbers, 125, 25. I'm going to cut those in half. That's what we're going to do our first torque sequence to. Now when it comes to sequence, ARP is awesome. Full sequence is on the back. It also comes with all the stuff you need to tell your machine shop when you drop these pedestals off. Now, depending on where you take them to, it's usually between $60 and $100 to get these done. Machine shop we used was $100, but that was a rush job. They had it done overnight. So, that's not too bad. $100 to do all of them and have them back in a couple hours. Would have been cheaper if I would have given them some time, but the customer wants this truck back, so we're going to pay a little extra to get it done in a hurry. Anyway, so here's our torque sequence. If you guys want to pause it there, you guys can see it, but I'm going to go grab a torque wrench and we are going to do our first pass. And like I said, I'm going to take all these numbers, pretty much cut them in half. And that's going to be pass 1. I know with a 1/4 inch ratchet, I'm not more than half of those numbers. So we'll get that done up, and then obviously we'll take it up again and go to the full torque on them. Alright, so we got the initial torque done on these. Everything is torqued down to 60 foot-pounds for the studs. I haven't touched these little bolts yet that set these, other than just snugging them down with the ratchet. We're going to go ahead and just run the final torque on the head studs, and I'm going to come back and torque these to their 25 foot-pounds. But everything's looking good so far. Alright, head is completely torqued down. I think next up, probably going to do exhaust manifold and turbo, but that's going to be the next video. Stay tuned, this build should be kind of fun. We're not going too crazy with this truck. So far, valve springs, push rods, head studs, freshly redone head. We're still going back, stock manifold, stock charger. It's getting a fluid dampener, governor springs, delivery valves, possibly a set of injectors right now, but just a pretty simple budget build to start with, and at some point this thing's going to be something pretty crazy. But like I said, stay tuned, check out the next video. Next one, we'll get the hot side hung on this thing. Almost forgot to mention, apparently ARP has jokes. One extra nut came with the kit. Everything is installed, but they sent one more. Not an extra washer, not an extra stud, but one nut. That will screw with you for a little while.